Today, I'm going to be talking about one of the worst natural disasters that happened in the United States. And this is known as the Great Storm of 1900. And it happened in Texas. And it happened in a little island known as Galveston. So if you pass Houston and you keep going towards the Gulf of Mexico, you will find Galveston. In the 1900s, Galveston was known as the Queen City of the Gulf. It was a very booming coastal city and it was considered the most prominent town in the South. It was the 1900s. It had electricity, it had telephones, it had streetcars, it had amazing, elaborate buildings and houses and churches. And if you went to the streets, it was lined with shops and it had a very busy port. And one of the reasons the Galveston was booming is because it had a natural deep water channel that made it one of the most important seaports in Texas. So a lot of wealthy people were living here. Now, on September 8th, 1900, they were warned that a storm was coming. And many people didn't think much of it. In reality, they just continued their days as if nothing happened. So that morning, around in the morning, people just went to work, and they just didn't pay much attention to anything because they thought it's like any other storm. So many went to work, women went to church or to shopping or anything they normally did. The hurricane arrived somewhere around September 8th, 1900 in the morning. It was a Saturday. So many residents, they were looking towards the Gulf of Mexico right here, and they saw this wave. It was big, approaching them. And people were curious, so they went to see what the hell was that. Even though they knew the storm was coming and there was raining and there was wind, they still went there. One of the survivors, his name was William Van Eaton, he actually said, okay, there was high winds and rain, but so little was thought of it that myself and some acquaintances started going down the beach. The water came up so rapidly that we turned and hurried towards the Tremont Hotel. Before we reached it, the water was to our waist. Then he went on to say that he started seeing how other people were running to try to go to the hotel to be in a safe place. There were women, men, children, and he saw two women with a child being swept away right in front of him, like less than 300 yards from him, and they just drowned and they couldn't do nothing. This storm was so strong that they estimate that the winds were anywhere between 150 miles per hour to 200 miles per hour. And we actually don't know because, like I say, this happened in the year 1900, and they didn't have the same equipment that we have nowadays to measure anything. In the wave, they estimated they were anywhere between 50 to 20 feet tall. Now, if we measure it with the hurricane scale that we use today, it will be considered a Category 4 storm. Another survivor, his name was Patrick Joyce, and he was a railroad worker, and he went to work that morning. But he said by the time it was 9 o'clock in the morning, the boss said, hey, just go home. It's kind of dangerous. It was raining very heavily. So they all stopped working and he headed home. But it took him a while to get home. He got there at around 11 o'clock in the morning. And by that time, okay, the water was 3 feet tall in his jar. And he said it began to get worse and worse. The water getting higher and the wind getting stronger. Until one point, he said it almost felt like he was in the Gulf itself. Finally, the house was taken off his foundation and completely demolished. So the force of the water lifted the house and destroyed it. And inside the house, however, there was his family. And if I remember well, there were 9 of them. He doesn't know what happened to most of them, but he remembers that he and his niece were able to get away, and they were trying to get through the wreckage while they were getting swept away by the water. At one point, his niece was knocked off his arms, and she drowned in front of him. And again, there was nothing he could do. It was like, I cannot even imagine how horrifying that must have been for him, and how helpless he felt at that moment. For 7 hours, he say he was in the water, getting thrown around until he was completely black and blue, not knowing in which direction he was actually going until he was finally able to get out. Now, but this time, he stood up and he said most of his clothes were completely removed by the force of the water and the wind. So he walked to a house where they kind of gave him some clothes so he could get dressed. And he goes on to say how he lost everything that day, his whole family, his house, and anything that meant something to him in this world. Then there's a story of Mrs. Chapman Bailey and Miss Blanche Kennedy, who were also swept away by the water, and they survived by floating all night and day, because it took them part of the day too, by grabbing themselves in pieces of wreckage until they found this wooden bathtub, and they both were able to get inside, and they were driven into the Gulf of Mexico overnight. So just imagine the water took you all the way to the middle of the ocean. How terrifying is this? And you have to picture though, this by this time the force of the wind and the water had taken out the power line, so there was dark and it was windy and there was probably thunderstorm, and these ladies are in the middle of the ocean floating in a wooden bathtub. Thankfully the tide brought them back the next morning and they were rescued, but all their relatives drowned. The storm continued, and like I said, it was so strong that it took many buildings with it. The roofs were blown away, and timber flew through the air like it was made out of paper. And it just basically left a bunch of debris everywhere. Many homes were either completely destroyed or lifted from their foundations and set adrift. And some of these houses that were lifted from the foundation, the families were still inside, like in the case of Miss Herschel. And she said, this, like I said before, she said the storm hit and they were inside the house with his family, and the water kept rising and rising, and suddenly the house gave like a big lurch, and it started creaking, and it began to swing from side to side. Imagine you're inside your house and your house is swinging from side to side, and suddenly it was just completely lifted from the foundation and it started floating away. So she and her family climbed all the way to the roof, and then she goes to say, our clothes were being torn from our backs by the wind, and we saw house after house floating by us, just telling a story of misery. She even went to say, this is an article in the Opelousas Courier, which is wonderful if you guys read it, because it has a lot of like stories from different people that survive. But right here, she even goes to say, like, by the time it was Sunday morning, she saw a mother with a baby, which she believed it was somewhere around 2 months old, and they were just clinging the best they could. The wind has taken everything from her, like all her clothing, and she was just holding into the baby, and her facial expression just were heart rending. Everybody was like looking at them as if they like just waiting for them to go underwater. It says all eyes were turned in her directions, waiting to see her disappear beneath the water. We had no long to wait, she said. The baby slipped from her arms, and in an effort to save it, she was lost too. So they witnessed as she struggled to try to save herself and the baby, and they witnessed as she was swept away, and both of them drowned. Again, this is horrifying. This is something that nobody should witness, and like how helpless and how heartbreaking is that. And you know that you cannot do anything, because if you try to save them, you are gonna get lost like that mom did trying to save her baby. Then I found another story about Thomas Clean, which is a horrible, horrible story. I don't know how else to describe it. It's completely heartbreaking. And he was home alone with his two small children. They were 2 and 4. And when the storm hit, he just did anything he could. So he grabbed one of each child under his arms, and he went outside the house, and they was swept away by the water among hundreds of other people. Now, he was doing anything he could to try to save them, and he saw this tree getting close to them. So he tried to put his 2 years old daughter on top of it, and the water just took her, and she was carried away, and she died. So now he saw that happen. He couldn't do anything, but he still has his son in his arm, and he's trying to save him. So for many, many hours, they were just like being dragged by the water and being hit by all this debris. And by the time he was able to stand up, he turned his baby around and he realized he was also dead. I don't know how this man survived after this, because first of all, seeing your daughter die right in front of you, you thinking that you are saving your son, then realizing he's gone too. I have no idea what happened with his wife. I don't know if she survived or if she was dead, or I don't know what happened to her, but just, I don't know. I cannot even picture what he went through or how he was able to know just die from sadness. I cannot even imagine the nightmares this man had for months, if not years. And I hope he found peace, and at one time he was reunited with his kids, because this is completely tragic. We have the story of this 12 years old boy. His name was Reuter, and he was with his family, which was dad, mom, and 2 siblings. And they were inside the house during the storm, and suddenly they heard this big crash, and the house went into million pieces. He was able to grab like a trunk, and he floated away with it for many, many hours, only to realize that he was the only survivor. Another story was about the Stuff family, which was dad, mom, and 2 kids. And their house completely collapsed, but they were able to get on top of the roof. And they were floating for a while, but they hit something, and the roof kind of cracked in half. And mom and one of the kids went one way, and dad and one of the kids went another way. So as they were drifting away, at one point, one of the kids fell off. And I don't know if he was with mom or with dad, but he fell off. And you can picture how all of them probably thought the other person is dead, you know? You don't know. For many hours, they were probably floating away. But on Sunday afternoon, they were able to find each other, and all 4 of them survived, which I think is a miracle, especially for a child that fell. Um, he fell to the water and he was able to survive. I don't know how old this kid was, but being able to survive in waters from like a hurricane and a storm, or I mean, it's even hard for an adult. So I was like very happy to hear that all 4 of them were able to be reunited, to tell the truth. Now, by the time, like the worst part of the storm happened Saturday night. I mean, it hit Galveston in the morning, and it started getting worse, worse, worse. But the worst happened at night. And by the time Sunday morning arrived, the wind and the wave had subsided. Now, what everybody saw was complete devastation. There was debris of all sorts, like the cables from the telephone poles, the electricity. They had no water. They had barely any food because it got destroyed by the water. The houses were just pieces of rubble, and most of the houses were completely uninhabitable. The railroad tracks were completely gone, and the bridges were carried away from the house. So they were completely completely cut off from the rest of society. They couldn't go to the mainland unless they had a boat. And at that moment, it's not like they had one right there, because even the ships that were right there, they got damaged by the storm. So they have to bring ships from the mainland to kind of bring resources or to help people get away from the island. But worst part is, thousands of people, okay, they were swallowed up by the water, and the bodies either were mangled or completely mutilated by the wreckage, and they were tossed everywhere. Like when people were walking around the ruins, they could see bodies everywhere. But you know what the worst part is that I don't know, some of the people that were there, they just decided that this was a great moment to start stealing from people. So they started robbing the bodies, and they even started mutilating the bodies to take the pieces of jewelry from them, like cutting their fingers or cutting the earrings to take the ears to take the earrings out. And it got so bad that even some of the survivors started shooting anybody that they found, to try to stop them, and they had to call the National Guard. And of course, it took them a little bit to get there, and it took them about 24 to 48 hours to control the situation. And basically, they did the same. Whoever they caught robbing or stealing from anybody, living or dead, they were put against a wall and they were just shot and killed. And eventually, after things calmed down a little bit, then people were put into jail and deported out of the island, but they were warned that if they ever returned, they were going to be executed. Now, as I said before, there were thousands, it wasn't even hundreds, there were thousands of bodies everywhere, okay? And people couldn't recognize many of them because they were either damaged by the storm, but also because it was so hot, they started decomposing or decaying very quickly. So the priority was to dispose of the dead. And those bodies of people who were identified, many family members will bury them in the backyard or anywhere that they knew that they could. But there were thousands that were unclaimed, and by this point, they were just open big holes and put a bunch of them, do like massive burial sites for these bodies, or they were loaded into boats and put weights on them and throw them in the deep sea, hoping that they will stay there. But some of the bodies, they were dragged back by the water into the island. So eventually what they did is that they started piling up bodies and dead animals, because there was a lot of cattle and horses, because back then most transportation was by horse, you know. So they will pile up the bodies and the dead animals and burn them. So picture the smell of decay. Okay, if you pass next to an animal, you see how bad it smells. Imagine thousands of human bodies decomposing, and animals too, and then the smell of burning flesh. That must have been horrible. Like I don't even know how people can stand the smell. Plus, it was hot, and I mean, Texas is humid. I don't need, and if you see these people right here that they're trying to like rescue whoever they are, look at him. Like this guy, they have pants and long sleeve and big dresses, and they're in this heat. I don't even know how they did it. People today wouldn't be able to do it. So they started clearing out, like once like the people who were stealing were under control and they had some supplies like food and water, they started clearing away ruins and trying to find survivors. I mean, they tried to find survivors since day one. And when they were clearing away the ruins of St. Mary's Orphanage, which was a Catholic home for children it was built right at the shoreline. So it was like the ocean, and then there was like a dune sand, and it was the house. This house was hit very strongly because it was basically right in front of the water. So when they were trying to move away the ruins, they found two groups of sisters and children, and they were tied together at the waist by a rope. They were found like this. The sister, they had a rope right here, and the kids were roped right here. So they have found two groups like that. So they're trying to find out what happened, and they later found out, because there were a couple kids that survived, that when the storm hit, right, the sisters decided to move all the kids to the girls' dormitory because it was the newest one, and they thought therefore there's gonna be the stronger one. So they started singing songs to kind of calm the kids down, and they sang a song named Queen of the Wave, which is a French hymn the sailors sang during storm. And in an effort to keep the children together, they used clothesline ropes to tie the kids in groups of 6 to 10. So they would put the rope around the kids' waist, and they will go to the next one and the next one, and eventually they will tie it up around the waist of one of the sisters. And as the storm was hitting, it struck with such force that it destroyed the boys' dormitory, making it completely collapse and sending debris everywhere. Eventually, the foundation of the girl dormitory was lifted, and the bottom fell out, and the roof collapsed right on top of them. So as I understand, they were trapped under the roof. So some of them either died by the being trapped, I don't know if they drowned, or just by the heavy weight of the roof, and some of them were swept away by the water. Now, 3 of the kids, which was the oldest kids, they were able to climb to the roof of the orphanage, and eventually all 3, they ended up in the same tree, and they were holding into that all day and all night, floating, until eventually they hit mainland. And when they did so, they just went to the other sisters, because there were more sisters at the infirmary, which was like more inland, and they told them what happened. And by the way, the sisters at the infirmary, they were amazing too, because as the water rise, I think it was either the second story or maybe even the third, the sister will peek into the window and will see people floating in the water, and they will just reach over the window and grab them and pull it inside. And they save many people that way, which is amazing. So these 3 kids, okay, they found the sisters, and then they tell them what happened. They say how the sisters moved them to the dormitory, how they started singing songs, how they tied each other together. But one of the things that one of the survivors' kids said is that he remembered one of the sisters kind of holding 2 small children in her arms, and she promised not to let them go, because they were kids from all ages, but these 2 were small children. And this sister, along with another sister, they were found across the bay, and when they found her, she was still holding those 2 little kids. Even after she died, she didn't let those 2 little kids go. She was holding into them even after her death. And many of the sisters, it says the sisters were buried wherever they were found, with the children still attached to them. So think about that. Many of these people who died in the storm of 1900, they were buried wherever they were found. So if you are there right now, you might be walking on top of somebody's burial site. And most of these kids that were in this place, which was more than 90 kids, they were there because the parents had died from yellow fever. And at the end, 10 sisters died and 90 kids died, and only 3 boys survived. Now, the aftermath of the storm left anywhere between 6,000 to 12,000 people dead. And they actually don't know exactly how many, because at one point they were just burning and burying people without being identified or anything, because they needed to dispose of the body. And apparently there were a lot of immigrants they didn't know who they were. But I always feel like the discrepancy is quite big. I mean, if you say, oh, 6 to 7,000, but 6,000 to 12,000 people, that's double. That's a lot of people who might have gone unaccounted, which is crazy. I read that at one point they were just like saying female around 20, boy around 10, men around 20, because they just couldn't wait for anybody to identify them. But anyhow, there were more than 3,600 homes that were destroyed, and many millions of dollars they were completely lost. But they were able to rebuild. They eventually were able to fortify Galveston by building a seawall that is 17 feet high and 6 miles long. So they started building it like this, and this is kind of like the seawall look like. And the red part right here is the first part of the seawall, and eventually they keep continuing, and all this line is what a seawall is today. So they raised it by about 17 feet higher, but they also started pumping like wet sand and to kind of raise, like right here, they started pumping wet sand, and then eventually it will dry up, and they raised the level of Galveston by around 18 feet higher to kind of prevent the island to be completely underwater in future storms. You see how they raised and how it's higher right here? That's kind of how much they raised it. In this house, it's still lower, so they probably raised the foundation to be at this new level. In some of the houses that they couldn't do that, they basically buried the first floor, because apparently these houses have multiple stories. So it would be fascinating to find out which houses were actually buried. So see, it's kind of like a spooky story. The one day you might go down and you find a completely floor under. I don't know, I think that's fascinating, to tell you the truth. Right here, this is how it looked before the storm hit. You see how it was completely flat, and right here you see the water is right here. This one is kind of flipped, so the water is right here. So this is like a pier, and here is the seawall, and here is the island. But you can see how they had to go down now to be able to go to the water. But anyhow, many buildings were fixed, like this one right here, and this is today known as the Bryan Museum. But originally it was the 1895 Galveston Orphan Home, and thankfully all the people who were inside, kids and adults, they survived. But you can see how it was very damaged by the storm. The middle part collapsed, and when they rebuilt it, they kind of didn't put this, I don't know if you call this a cupola or whatever, this pointy part. They just made the roof kind of flat. And it continued as an orphanage for a long time, and eventually it closed, and then it was transformed into the Bryan Museum. That if you go there today, you can actually, if I remember well, they have a section about this 1900 storm. Now here's where the spooky part begins, okay? Because many people believe that Galveston is actually haunted, period. But others believe that it's haunted by many of those people who died in that storm of the 1900s. The first place I want to talk is about the Seawall Walmart, which is located where the St. Mary's Orphanage used to be. So just a quick recollection, the St. Mary's Orphanage, when the storm hit, it was located right in front of the beach. So basically the sisters took all the orphans to the girls' dormitory, and eventually the floor of the girls' dormitory collapsed and the roof fell on top of them, and some of them were swept away by the water of the storm, of the hurricane, and some of them just got trapped there. But when they were found, they found the sisters with a rope around the waist, and all the little kids were attached to her. But anyhow, that's how they found them. They found them like that. And now this Walmart is located right where this house used to be. So this was the orphanage before the storm. This is what the Walmart is. And right here in the street, like in see Wall Street in Walmart, right there where the red arrow is where the historical marker was placed, because that's exactly where the house used to be. And that's what the Walmart. Now this Walmart, many things have happened in here, and even the workers will say that this Walmart is haunted. For example, one day, one of the employees, she was just walking around the toy section, and then she hears this little girl crying, and she saw, you know what, it might have been a little girl that got lost and she's looking for her mom. So she started looking for her to see where the kid was. She was looking all up and down the toy section, and then she realized that she couldn't find it. Then another employee came, and she also could hear the little girl crying. So between the two of them, they kept going up and down the aisle, and all of a sudden the cries stopped. But there was no one there. There was no adult, no children, no one. So they assumed it was the ghost of one of the kids from the 1900 storm. Now, other things that kept happening continuously is they keep finding toys on the floor. And I mean, if it's during the daytime, you don't think much, right? Because during the day, many kids are playing with toys. But these kind of things happen mostly at night. Like the workers will start putting things ready for the next day, and they will fix their house, put the toys away, and then they will come back, and these toys are on the floor. And sometimes even during the day, they will hear like little toys sound, or like the lights turning on and off. They said that one time they had this complete pallet of toys like ready to be put away, and it vanished. Some of them said that they were never found, and some of them say, oh, then all of a sudden the pallet of toys, it's found somewhere else. They are also constantly hearing little kids laughing and running and crying. Then on another day, there was a customer, it was a husband and wife. They were just walking around, and they all of a sudden saw a bull like running towards them from the end of the hallway all the way to them, but there was no one on the other side of the aisle. And another day, an employee was helping one of the customers in the camping section, and they were just chit-chatting. I don't know exactly what they were asking, and suddenly they hear this big crash noise, and they tried to figure out what it is. And as the employee turned around, she kind of saw a bunch of ashes like falling from the shelf. And on a rainy day, she even said that some of those big water juggles that you use for camping, they were like on the top shelf, and they just suddenly fell down. Now, many employees also, and some of the employees said that at night too, they saw like the bread aisle, the bread falling down, but also a customer saw that happen, and she said, oh, I remember when I was a little kid, I was walking there and I could see the bread loaf just falling out of the shelf, which is creepy enough. One of the workers that work at night there, he will say that he will constantly hear this little girl screaming or crying, and one time he even saw the silhouette of this little girl out of nowhere. Then there's the story of the guy that said that he was one day working, he saw this little balloon like floating around, and he didn't think much of it. So he thought maybe it's one of these helium balloons that lost air, but he noticed it had a pattern, and it was kind of like it was following an employee. Like if you were walking in an aisle, the balloon was following you around. So he went around to see who it was, but there was no one in there. Even today, they say this Walmart is very haunted. Have any of you gone to that one and experienced anything abnormal? Or have you ever been anywhere else and experienced something spooky that you would like to share? Anyhow, the second haunted building that I could find a story related to the 1900 storm was the Grand Opera House. And the Grand Opera House was actually built in 1894. So this building is old. Now, when the storm hit, it was heavily damaged. Let me show you. So this is kind of the way the front looked before the storm, and that this is like the facade. So, and this was after the storm. This is kind of like to the side. So if you can see in the after picture in the back, most of the back was completely gone, which is the part with the seating area and the stage was. So that was gone, and they had to rebuild it. And it took them almost a year because it reopened in October of 1901, which is, I mean, I feel for that time. And for that time being, they kind of didn't take that long, like 1 year to rebuild that in 1900. Just think about it. That was amazing. This building is said to be haunted by the ghost of Charles Colvin. And he was an actor and a playwright. He actually went to Galveston in 1899, which was the year before, to perform the Royal Box. Now, when he got there, he got very sick and he couldn't perform. Somebody else had to do it for him. And he was sick for a whole month. And they figured out he had gastritis, I don't know when, but he ended up dying in November 27, 1899. So they put his remains in a metallic casket. And originally the plan was to send him to Prince Edward Island in Canada, where his summer house was. However, a couple days after, they announced that they actually were going to send his remains to New York, where he was going to be cremated. However, the plan was, it never happened, because by September 8, 1900, the day the storm hit, his body was still in Galveston, and his casket, along with many others, were swept away. I mean, the water took it. And at first they thought, oh my God, where is he, right? But in 1904, they found a casket and they thought it belonged to him. But boy, oh boy, they were wrong. It wasn't him. Then in 1907, they found another casket. And now here is kind of where either this is a BS story, or if it happened, I mean, it's paranormal by itself, because they said that this casket went from Galveston and went all around Florida and went up North Carolina, South Carolina, New York, and around, and landed on Prince Edward Island, which is in Canada. So if basically his casket went all the way home. And if this is true, my God, he had very powerful ghost powers to send himself home. However, I don't think it's true. I think that was made up. And it's supposed to be somebody from Believe It or Not did a story, I think in 1997, but I don't think this is true. Anyhow, even if his casket was found or not, his spirit never left, because it's said that he still haunts the Grand Opera House in Galveston. In here, they said that they have seen a man wearing a hat and a cape. Like sometimes he's just like sitting in the balcony watching a show, or they see him like floating around. Then there's another ghost, the ghost of Walter Smith. And this man, he actually in 1910 confessed to start a fire in the stage and in the basement of the Grand Opera House. And he confessed. He said, hey, yes, I did it. And he went to try, and he was found guilty, but he believed his sentence got influenced by the negative press. So his jury wasn't fair. That's what he believed. But they say that now he haunts the Grand Opera House because at times when people are on the stage, they can smell smoke, and there's no one or nothing there for that smell. Then around 1920, at this time, I mean, the Grand Opera House wasn't doing that well, and they decided to kind of change it to like a movie theater. So they took from the second floor, they took one of the balconies and transformed it to have those little windows so they can project the movies. And during that time, they kept saying the employees, after the movies and everything was done and they were trying to clean, they will find these three ladies sitting in the chair as if they were waiting for somebody or some show to start, and then they will vanish. And at one point they said that they even called the police to try to find them because they literally saw them and there was nobody there. They have also seen objects moving around. For instance, in one Christmas, they were decorating the lobby, and all of a sudden they saw this box moving from one end of the lobby to the next one, as if it was being pushed by an invisible force. They have light malfunctioning. Like one of the stories is that when they were doing some of the preparations in the Grand Opera House, they have the old-fashioned light switch. They turned it off because they were leaving, and all of a sudden the light went back up. So they went back and they turned the lights back off, and as they were leaving again, the lights turned back on. And by that time, they just got spooked and left. But nowadays, they have seen malfunctioning of flashlights, like where the flashlight will start flickering and all of a sudden it turns off. And then when they go check the flashlights, it's completely fine. Now, another ghost that is very known in here, they call her Sarah, the ones that work in there. And she's been seen everywhere. So the story goes, like it says that one day, one of the psychics went and said the story about what happened to this lady that they keep seeing. But it said that in 1909, a girl around 19 years old, she was getting dressed in a white dress to perform when her love came, and he says, you know what, I don't love you anymore, I'm leaving you for another woman. And she became so sad that she actually ran and jumped through the window and died, and now she's stuck in here. So sometimes you can see her in the basement, and sometimes you can see her like through the window where the projector used to be. So sometimes the actors or the visitors, they will see her, like they will see like a woman dressed in white passing in front of the windows where the spotlights are now. They used to be the projector, but now it's where the spotlights are. But she has also been seen in the attic, which is in the 5th floor, but apparently, which is a little different. They say when this female spirit in the attic is there, she is actually a little more aggressive because she doesn't like other women, saying that many females have felt as if a force had pushed them, and they believe it's the same spirit, which is kind of odd to me because I mean, she seems to be nice in any of the floors except this one. They have also seen a lady in pink, which they refer as Rose because of that, and she has been seen sitting in the balcony on the 2nd floor, and sometimes they can hear her like laughing during rehearsal when there's nobody in the audience. And this one is kind of cute. This is the story of the ghost of a little dog, and they believe that when the Grand Opera House was open as an adult movie place, the manager used to live in an apartment above the Grand Opera House, and he had a dog, and the dog died somehow. I don't know exactly how or when, and now they have seen him like running in the basement or in the hallways, which is kind of cute and spooky at the same time. Now, many people have felt things moving from the back pockets, or furniture being moved, or objects being moved. They have seen the seating of the theater. You know how those chairs are like full, and when you're gonna see it, you kind of lower the lower part and you see, well, they have seen the lower part kind of lowering by itself and stay down as if somebody is sitting in there. And one time I saw this story, this guy said that all of a sudden he felt like this cold blast of air, and it was very chilly, and he turned around because there was another worker with him, and he asked, did you feel that? And he was like, I didn't feel anything. But they have felt these little cold spots now and then in different places. Now, on the 4th floor, it is a ballet studio today. Then, like the front door, they have said that it have opened by itself, right? And they were kind of spooked, and it happened several times. But I saw a video where they did a paranormal investigation. They say when the door is not latched completely and you open another door, it kind of creates like a negative pressure and it will make the door open up if you are there. I mean, because it looks like it was like where the little girls will change and they can go outside through another door. So just imagine you are inside the studio and there's nobody there, but the little girls are leaving and the door will start opening slowly. And you already heard spooky stories about this place, how you probably freaked out. If you have any suggestions or if you have any paranormal stories that you would like to share with us, send it at IvonnePlusOne@gmail.com and we'll see you next time. Bye.